The public failure that made Lucas discover who he really was. Chapter 1. The perfect plan that went publicly wrong. Lucas had always been the type to double-check every step before moving forward. In his mind, failure was something that happened to other people, to those who weren't prepared, disciplined, or driven enough. For months, he had poured his energy, time, and resources into a project he believed would be his breakthrough. It was something he thought would change the trajectory of his career. A new business pitch that combined his creativity with a cause he deeply cared about. He rehearsed his presentation countless times, visualized the applause, and imagined the doors of opportunity swinging open the moment he finished speaking. When the big day arrived, Lucas walked into the conference room with his head held high. The lights fell hot on his face, but his confidence drowned out the nerves. This was his stage, his moment. He spoke with conviction, moving through each slide as if he had memorized the entire sequence in his bones. Yet, halfway through, something unexpected happened. The projector froze, his carefully timed animations vanished, and a key file he needed to make his argument was nowhere to be found. He tried to improvise, but the words tangled in his throat. The once engaged audience began exchanging glances, whispering under their breath. A few people even checked their phones. Lucas felt the air in the room shift from anticipation to polite discomfort. By the time he wrapped up, there was no applause, no handshake from the investors, no hopeful follow-up questions. Only silence and the crushing weight of knowing he had failed in front of everyone. In that moment, he wanted to disappear. His mind replayed every second in slow motion, obsessing over what he could have done differently. But little did Lucas know, this public collapse would become the turning point that stripped away the image he had built and forced him to confront the deeper question. Who was he without the perfect plan? Chapter 2. The aftermath, shame, self-doubt, and the urge to hide. The hours after the failed presentation felt like an endless blur for Lucas. He left the conference room as quickly as he could, avoiding eye contact with anyone. His footsteps echoed in the hallway, each one heavier than the last. By the time he reached his car, the adrenaline that had carried him earlier was gone, replaced by a sinking weight in his chest. It wasn't just disappointment, it was humiliation. At home, he replayed the disaster over and over in his head. The frozen screen, the nervous stammer, the investors' blank stares. He remembered the slight smirk on one person's face, the way someone in the back shook their head. Every tiny detail became a sharp thorn, piercing deeper into his sense of self-worth. He started thinking in absolutes. Maybe I'm not cut out for this. Maybe I'm just pretending to be capable. Maybe they were all right to ignore me. In the days that followed, Lucas withdrew. He skipped social gatherings, turned down invitations, and avoided phone calls from friends who had heard about the event. The idea of running into anyone who might bring it up felt unbearable. Even simple tasks, going to the grocery store, answering emails, felt like opportunities for someone to silently judge him. He buried himself in busy work, telling himself he was regrouping, but in truth, he was hiding. His confidence wasn't just shaken, it was shattered. And yet, beneath the shame and self-doubt, something quiet began to stir. A tiny, almost imperceptible sense that maybe this failure had exposed something he needed to face. That faint awareness wouldn't fully surface yet, but it was the seed of transformation that would grow later. For now, Lucas sat in the darkness, feeling the full weight of what it means to fall flat in front of an audience, and to wonder if he'd ever stand tall again. Chapter 3. The Turning Point, a conversation that changed his perspective. It happened on a Tuesday afternoon, the kind of day Lucas had resigned himself to spending in quiet avoidance. He was sitting in a small cafe, laptop open but untouched, pretending to work while really scrolling aimlessly. That's when Daniel walked in, an old college friend he hadn't seen in years. Daniel was the kind of person who noticed things. He didn't greet Lucas with a casual, "How's it going?" but instead with, "You look like you've been carrying a boulder on your back." Lucas laughed awkwardly, trying to wave it off, but Daniel wasn't buying it. They sat down, and soon the story spilled out. Every painful detail of the failed presentation, the embarrassment, the withdrawal. Lucas braced himself for judgment or pity, but instead, Daniel leaned back and said something that would stick in Lucas's mind for months. Do you think your worth as a person depends on how flawlessly you perform in front of a group of strangers? The question was so direct, so deceptively simple, that Lucas didn't know how to answer. Daniel went on. The people who grow the most aren't the ones who never fall. They're the ones who learn how to stand up faster. You fell once. That's not your identity. It's just an event. Lucas felt a mix of resistance and relief. Resistance, because part of him still wanted to cling to the failure as proof of his inadequacy. Relief, because maybe, just maybe, this one humiliating moment didn't have to define him. Before they left the cafe, Daniel shared his own story of bombing a major job interview years ago and how that rejection eventually led him to a career he loved. Lucas walked out with a strange sense of possibility, like a window had cracked open in a room he thought was sealed shut. It wasn't a total transformation. He still carried the weight of the failure. But it was the first time he saw that the narrative could change. And more importantly, that he could be the one to change it. Chapter 4. Taking the first step toward rebuilding. The next morning, Lucas sat on the edge of his bed, staring at the floor. Daniel's words from the cafe still echoed in his mind, but acting on them felt like stepping barefoot onto a frozen lake. Every instinct told him to retreat. For weeks, he had avoided anything that reminded him of public speaking or leadership. He had even turned down opportunities at work just to keep from being noticed. But now, for the first time, he wondered if hiding was doing more damage than the failure itself. He remembered something Daniel said. You don't have to leap back to where you were. Just take the smallest possible step in the right direction. So Lucas decided on something manageable. Instead of signing up for a big presentation, he volunteered to lead a short 5-minute update in the next team meeting. It was low stakes, but to him, it felt monumental. When the day came, he almost backed out. His heart pounded in the minutes leading up to his turn. His palms were sweaty, and the same doubts crept in. What if I freeze? What if they remember what happened last time? But as he stood up, he made himself focus on one thing, the value of the information he was sharing, not on whether people liked him. It wasn't perfect. He stumbled over a sentence, lost his train of thought once, and had to glance at his notes more than he wanted. But when it was over, something surprising happened. No one laughed, no one looked disappointed. A few even nodded in appreciation. The relief was almost overwhelming. Lucas realized that the world had moved on from his old failure long before he had. That small act of showing up, not flawlessly, but courageously, was the first brick in rebuilding his confidence. It was still fragile, but it was there, and it made him wonder what else he could rebuild if he kept taking steps like this. Chapter 5. Building Resilience Through Small, Consistent Challenges. After the small win at the team meeting, Lucas didn't feel cured of his fear. Far from it. But something had shifted. He understood now that rebuilding his confidence wasn't about waiting for courage to magically appear. It was about training it like a muscle. And the only way to train it was through deliberate, repeated action. So, he started small on purpose. Each week, Lucas chose one challenge that felt just slightly uncomfortable. Not overwhelming, just enough to make his pulse quicken. One week, it was speaking up once in a group discussion. Another week, it was sharing an idea in a brainstorming session without overthinking it for days beforehand. At first, these moments left him drained. He'd go home replaying everything he said, dissecting whether it sounded awkward. But slowly something changed. The more he faced these little discomforts, the less power they seemed to have over him. He realized that fear wasn't a wall, it was a wave. And waves, no matter how strong, always pass if you stand your ground long enough. This understanding made him bolder. Soon, Lucas was volunteering for projects that put him in direct contact with senior leaders or agreeing to represent his team in cross-department meetings. There were still slip-ups. He still stumbled over words sometimes, and there were days he felt that creeping urge to retreat. But now he recognized those feelings as part of the process, not proof that he wasn't capable. And with each small challenge overcome, Lucas began to feel something he hadn't in a long time. Trust in himself. Not trust that he would always perform perfectly, but trust that he could handle whatever came, even if things didn't go as planned. That growing trust was becoming the foundation of a new identity, one that was stronger, steadier, and far more authentic than the one he had before his public failure. Chapter 6: A high-stakes test of his newfound strength. Months into his quiet transformation, Lucas felt like he was finally regaining control of his life. He wasn't chasing perfection anymore. Instead, he was collecting small victories, letting them stack into a solid foundation of self-trust. But growth rarely comes without a test, and it came sooner than expected. One Monday morning, his manager approached him with an urgent request. A senior client presentation had just been moved up, and the person who was supposed to lead it had fallen sick. The meeting was in 3 days. The chapter? Lucas's area of expertise. The audience? Not just the client's top executives, but also Lucas's own company's leadership team, the very people who had witnessed his public collapse months earlier. For a moment, it felt like the air was sucked out of the room. His chest tightened. His mind replayed the image of himself stammering and sweating during that earlier disaster. The easy way out would have been to decline, to say he wasn't ready. No one would have blamed him. But this time Lucas paused. He remembered all the smaller challenges he had taken on, moments where fear had whispered, "Don't do it," but he had pushed forward anyway. He reminded himself, the fear never truly disappears. You just learn to carry it differently. Instead of running from the opportunity, he said, "I'll do it." And immediately, the fear shifted into focus. For 3 days, Lucas prepared obsessively, but not out of desperation, out of respect for himself and the opportunity. He practiced not just the words, but his breathing, his pacing, even the silences between points. He visualized standing in the room, making eye contact and holding his ground. When the day came, the nerves were still there. His palms still sweated. But when he stepped up to speak, something remarkable happened. He didn't feel like the broken man from months ago. He felt like someone who had survived the fall, rebuilt from the inside out, and was ready to stand on that stage again. Not because he was fearless, but because he was prepared. That presentation would become a defining moment in his journey, not just for the outcome, but for what it proved to himself. He could face high stakes, feel the weight of fear, and still choose to show up. Chapter 7: The outcome that changed everything. When Lucas walked off the stage, there was a moment of silence in the room. For a split second, he panicked. Had he said something wrong? Was everyone just being polite? But then the client CEO leaned forward, smiled, and said, "That was exactly what we needed to hear." A wave of relief washed over him. But this time it wasn't the same kind of frantic, shaky relief he used to feel when he got through something. This was calmer, heavier, like the weight of a door closing on an old chapter of his life. The people in that room weren't just clapping for the presentation. They were acknowledging the person he had become since his very public failure. After the meeting, his manager pulled him aside and said, "I knew you could do it. But I think the real win here is that now you know it too." Those words stuck with Lucas. It was true. The most important shift wasn't in how others saw him, but in how he saw himself. The feedback from the client was glowing. They signed an extended contract, praising Lucas's clarity and confidence. But strangely, that external validation, which he once craved so desperately, didn't feel like the ultimate prize anymore. The real reward was internal. The quiet, almost unshakable feeling that even when the spotlight is on and the stakes are high, he could still hold his ground without betraying himself. He realized something powerful. His past failure hadn't been the end of his story, but a turning point that forced him to build a deeper kind of strength. One that didn't depend on everything going perfectly, but on his ability to adapt, recover, and keep showing up. This moment didn't erase his fear of public speaking, but it transformed it. Instead of seeing fear as a stop sign, he now saw it as a signal. We're doing something that matters. And that perspective shift, more than the applause or the compliments, became the cornerstone of his self-confidence. Chapter 8: Integrating the lesson into life. In the weeks after his presentation, Lucas noticed that something fundamental in him had shifted. It wasn't just about work anymore. It was about how he carried himself in every situation. The fear of failing in front of others that had once dictated his choices began to loosen its grip. He started saying yes to things he would have avoided before. Joining a weekend hiking group, even though he didn't know anyone there, volunteering to mentor a younger colleague, even inviting an old friend out for coffee after years of drifting apart. Each time, he felt a small twinge of discomfort, the same discomfort that used to make him retreat, but now he recognized it as growth in disguise. More importantly, Lucas stopped tailoring his behavior to what he thought people wanted to see. In conversations, he was more present, speaking honestly instead of carefully calculating every word. When he didn't know something, he admitted it without shame. When he had an opinion, he voiced it without checking the temperature of the room first. This newfound authenticity spilled into his personal life too. With family, he set boundaries he had previously been too afraid to enforce. With friends, he stopped overcommitting to things just to avoid disappointing them. And slowly, his relationships began to deepen, not because he was trying harder to please others, but because he was finally showing up as himself. He realized that the lesson wasn't simply about overcoming fear or learning confidence. It was about reclaiming the parts of himself he had abandoned in his quest for approval. The public failure that once haunted him had actually freed him, because it taught him that the worst had already happened and he had survived. Now, instead of asking, "What if I fail?" Lucas asked himself a different question. What if I never try? And that shift, more than anything else, became the quiet force guiding his decisions, reminding him that his worth was never tied to perfection, but to his willingness to live fully and unapologetically.